Welcome to the Lab Report, a new series produced by Cincinnati Lab Theater. Each episode, we will explore different topics regarding theater, featuring lab company members and special guest artists. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 6 of the Lab Report, Remote on Stage. I am your host, Tori Pate. In this episode, we talk to theater artists about how they adapted their productions to a remote content, the challenges they experienced, and what the future holds for non-traditional content post-pandemic. Enjoy. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Let's get to some introductions. First, we have Nathan Gabriel. He is the co-director of Theater Xavier at St. Xavier High School and also the assistant professor at Temple University. Next, we have Andrew Hungerford, who is the producing artistic director of the No Theater Cincinnati. Eileen Ernest, who is the artistic director at the Powell Crosley Theater in Sarasota, Florida, and the co-founder of Two Sketchy Dames. Maggie Perino, who is the theater director at the Carnegie and the president of the League of Cincinnati Theaters. And finally, Jeff Miller, who is an actor, director, playwright, and a Cincinnati Lab Theater member. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all. All right. So, show of hands. In March of 2020, who was part of a production that had to be canceled? Or later in the summer, that was when we thought, oh, we'll be able to do them in the summer, and they had to be canceled. Yep, we've all been there. So we all canceled performances. When did you decide that you needed to, we'll use the buzzword pivot. Everyone's pivoting now. When did you decide you needed to pivot and try something new during this pandemic?
We just canceled the production of Fiddler on the Roof we were working on. And everyone was so deeply saddened by it that I was like, okay, we were originally going to do a radio drama next because that I figured wouldn't get canceled. But as I got more, after I selected the radio drama, I selected War of the Worlds. And I began to realize that 90% of it was single person reporter stuff. And I was like, that could be filmed. I was like, what do I do about the crowd scenes where aliens set everybody on fire? And then I was like, if I set it in modern pandemic America, we'll be outside and they can just all wear masks. So that's what we did. And then I was like, forget radio drama, we're making a movie. We started to hire in some new people that we've never worked with and get some cameras, and we made a movie. And that was really fulfilling to like take something and turn it into something else so successfully, that and to like beat the pandemic. That was really great. And we were able to film a movie and get it up, a movie version of War of the Worlds.
I didn't pivot. I slammed into the wall of the pandemic and ate my weight in cheese and wine as all of my gigs fell like dominoes before me. I was like, I wonder what I'm gonna do for a bit. And I took to Amazon Prime and bought a whole lot of shit that I didn't know how to use. And I was like, what the fuck is Zoom? And why is everybody shouting it? So I did, it was like I was in freshman year of college again. And I was like, I guess you just figure out how this works. So I bought a ring light and I bought a new laptop that had a nicer camera. And I'm currently using every book in our goddamn house to get the right angle. and so it's like, the dining room is now Eileen's creative arts studio, part-time healthcare clown, full-time brainstorm table, and my husband stays upstairs and quiet.
So funny because I was just having this conversation. It's like, okay, like this is my office now from 8:30 to 10. This is where my rehearsal room / office / everything that I'm going to do artistically is going to happen in our dining room now. So I need you to stay out of here for a while. Thanks.
So I actually was listening to a podcast fairly recently that was talking about ambiguous grief and how the entire artistic world is going through ambiguous grief because we have no idea when whatever returns will return. And so like, how do you pivot when you don't know what you're pivoting to? Mm. And so that has been kind of an interesting journey because it's almost like we're inventing new ways to be creative because some of them are marvelous. Some of them are like, hey, we did it, our first year of film school and look at what we made. And that's fine, like, great. And we're going to expand. But I also don't think this is the first or the last pandemic that we're going to experience. So like gaining this knowledge has really been powerful and empowering. But yeah, I fell hard and was like, I don't feel creative. I don't want to be creative because I lost things. And so like moving through that was really interesting. And then coming to the other side to go, okay, I'm ready to work, but what does that mean?
Yeah, I'm with Eileen. I took some time to cry. There was a fair amount of just crying, just a little time for me and some crying. And honestly, I honestly went between a sort of like manic state a little bit because it was like, I haven't had a break in years. What's going on? I'm at home. I can spend all day in my pajamas on my couch. Is this allowed? Did they do this just for me? Did someone hear that inside my heart I needed a break so bad that I broke the world to get it? So, there's like that like side, right? Where there was that part where I like got a rest for the first time in a long time. But then there was obviously exactly what Eileen just described of this, sort of incredible and very ambiguous grief that just like haunted every other thing I was trying to do. And yeah, no, I took a solid several weeks there trying to just like wallow. Just like, fuck it. Sorry, are we allowed to swear on this?
Yes, please.
Edit that out. Okay, sorry. Fuck it, I'm gonna wallow. That's what I decided. So I did for a little bit there. Yeah, and then, slow but sure, you make 1,800 plans. You think you're going to be back in August and you're not. That was silly. Wasn't that silly? What a bunch of time we spent talking about all our plans. That was crazy. But, the only thing I could think to do that would be helpful was literally just start talking to other people. Like, what do you need? What are you going through? What, if we ever get back from this, what do you think we should do? Because at this point, all cards on the table, right? Like, I don't need my season to look exactly the way it did. I don't need the things we did before to be the same. Like, if they're not going to work, then what will work? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to think about making theater. And that's going to be hard for a while, but like, I got to figure something out. And luckily, a lot of people had a lot of really good ideas. And like, basically I've just put like my intense need to be a maker just behind other people's stuff. And was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Great. Can I produce that? Great. Let's do it. And it's enough to like keep you sane. And I think honestly, we built a fair coalition of humans that like needed something to hang on to and a place to put their grief. And like finding ways to do it together and make art in service of other people who needed it. Like, that worked.
I think one of the things that was sort of fascinating for us is we had a series of rapid pivots sort of forced upon us by the circumstances of our season. Like, oh no, this show is canceled, or this show has to stop. How do we finish? We already have contracts. How do we sell more tickets to this world premiere play? And then it was, oh no, we're producing a fringe festival. How do we do that? And so we rapidly implemented digital infrastructure to try and get whatever that could be and try to make it as much of a fringe experience as possible. We were trying to figure out, okay, what makes theater theater, and how do we preserve that through digital means? And what are different aspects of liveness that we can play with? And what are different ways of engaging audiences? We were trying to do a different show this January, a solo show, and just could not get a contract. And so we were like, at a certain point, well, what if we just make something? And we are a company of artists. What if we just make something? And what if it were somehow choose your own adventure? And so we made this plan at the beginning of November and had no idea, like, is there technology that even supports this? I don't know. We'll figure it out. I was live streaming from my attic with like my camera on some cardboard boxes, and then I put my chair in a certain place, but then I could never move that chair because I failed to spike it. And now I better make sure I'm muted for the half hour before when we're live streaming so that nobody
You're
hears me.
always about 92% sure everything's working, but so you have to like eyeball everybody else. Like, can you hear me? Are we moving? Am I moving?
in the middle of one of the
to
live
make eye
streams.
contact with other people too. It just doesn't. You're like,
Right.
why can't I make eye contact with them?
I was in the middle of one of my live streams, and there's a bunch of that I was reading from a book, and I'm in the middle of something, and suddenly my brain goes, I wonder if my microphone's working. Is my microphone working? And so I'm still reading the words, and my eyes go over. I'm like, oh shit, is that not working? Oh no, it is working. Okay, back to the.
While we're complaining about making theater online, anyone else here have kids? Am I the only one with kids? Okay, trying to have some like this right now. I don't know if you guys notice, I'm the only one who keeps muting because there are 3 children running up and down the stairs on the other side of that door. And this happens, whether you're having a rehearsal or whether you're doing something, that's not a rehearsal. It's going to happen because it's a pandemic. There's nowhere for them to go and there's no one to watch them but you. And so that is like the big challenge in my life is how do I have Zoom rehearsals with people making noise in the background? And it's this. Every time I'm not talking, I'm on mute. And I keep my fingers crossed.
I wanted to go back to something that Andrew said a second ago, and because I love it, the idea of how we play with liveness, because there's this like blend between where we get into, as actors, I know as a performer, and I've directed over Zoom as well, we get into this blend where like you got to be more subtle on the camera, but like we don't want to lose that sense of like urgency that theater brings, and we don't have anyone to laugh with us, which is the worst, right? Like you don't know if anything's playing, it's just there's just always this struggle. So the show I directed Dog with Cincinnati Lab when we kind of went into more Zoom performances, and I'm like, how do I make this performative? How do I not make it feel like these are 5 different people in a different room talking to each other, right? Like I found trying to pass props through the camera, like really like stretching the suspension of disbelief for the audience as much as they possibly can to make them kind of buy into the platform a little bit. And I don't know if y'all have experienced any of that kind of stuff to try to, because I love that idea of trying to, what is theater? Well, that live aspect we're losing, how do we make it live over these platforms? And I love that. I think it's where we all have to think about as theater artists right now. So.
I will say on the flip side of that, because I'm an improviser, and I, before the pandemic, I was traveling all over the country doing that. And now in the pandemic, I'm traveling all over the country doing that. And I have been able to play with so many of my friends via this virtual world. And the amount of excitement and whimsy that you can get in this little box of nonsense is kind of amazing, because it's like, great, now I can pinpoint exactly what I want you to see. But it has been like a really like, oh, hey, can you do a show? Yeah. 10 minutes later, hey, can you be in this show tonight at 8? Yeah, I've got like 10 minutes. I can switch over Zooms. That's fine. So I'm like, I'm working more now.
I was gonna say I'll be the contrarian here. I love digital formats for everyone else. I love them for you. I just don't want them for me. I don't know. Like, oh, live is live for me. I don't know. I think maybe part of it is like dance is is like my super main background discipline, and like for me there's just that, I don't know, there's like that physical energy and like that I don't know. I have a hard time with it. I want everyone else to do it. I want to enjoy it and watch the fruits of your wares. But 3D space and like flow and movement and how things like make pictures and move through them. Like I need to be in 3D. It's a real problem. Or like, I mean, a lot of the stuff we've pivoted to, honestly, is like tiny things that are improv based and come to your house, like not in your house, in your yard, right? And you sit outside and we wear masks while we do it, which has actually been one of the most interesting things, because I really thought, who wants to watch a bunch of people wearing masks in a context that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with masks? But it turns out they don't care that much. So, you know, certainly I'll put my efforts there, but everyone else keep making the digital. I love it. I wish I could do it, but it's not my thing.
That's my cue to disagree with you. I am like all in.
Great.
My professional project, I have hooked up with a playwright in DC who writes audio theater, and we're holding auditions from actors around the country, and we're going to be able to rehearse via Zoom. It's a 10-episode series that's going to be a podcast, and so we're going to hold Zoom auditions, and then we're going to hold Zoom rehearsals, and then we're probably all going to meet in Washington, D.C. for one weekend to knock out 10 episodes over the course of 3 days. But like outside of that, it's going to be it is like you were saying, Eileen, it is opening up the world for me to work with people that I definitely otherwise wouldn't have.
I want to go back to what Maggie was saying about how she loves doing her stuff in person and not digital. How have the rest of you, what have you decided to do for your performances? Are you doing all digital? Andrew mentioned doing like hybrid stuff. What kind of new performances are you doing at this time, and how have your audiences responded to it?
One of the things that Andrew had kind of talked about before, making your own shit, I've become very good at. And because then the audience is off kilter a little bit. Like there's a certain expectation that and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I feel like if you're going to do something like The Sound of Music, there's a certain expectation of what that looks like and what that sounds like. And no amount of tech, including a live Sound of Music that appeared on television, is going to give people that joy. So, we're certainly not going to achieve that in the basement of everyone's mom's house. So, creating these experiences that no one has seen yet offers you a fair amount of grace from the audience because they're along for the ride. And for me, being able to, specifically with Two Sketchy Dames and a lot of my solo shows, we plop in both pre-recorded and live streaming together. So it becomes both an experience to sit back and watch and an experience for them to participate in. And, that also goes down the rabbit hole of, interactive theater, I don't know if I like it. But what I have found in this digital age is that it is far too common that they will watch about 30 seconds and then go, I didn't make the popcorn. And then come back. And then they're like, you know what? I have to pee. It's fine. And they leave and they come back. So they didn't actually watch anything. And that's both good and bad, but having that almost line of danger, like at any point they will come back on the screen and ask me for something or talk to us. And I don't want to miss it. I like scaring the audience in that way.
I think our audience response was really strong when we pivoted to digital for Alabaster, our first show, because we were like, I want to see it. And also, that was a playwright who is connected across the country. So she was like, hey, you can all see my play now. And so tons of people tuned in, and we actually exceeded our box office goal, which was amazing, thanks to the digital sales. Our production of Feast over the summer, I think, sold pretty well, and we were, again, exceeded the modest goal that we had set. We were really happy about that. I think once we got into November with the election, and just we were hitting a point of pandemic fatigue where people just had to back away for a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of why for our Devise show, The Light at the End of a World, we programmed it very specifically to be a one weekend only thing to start with, so that one, I wouldn't have to live stream from my attic every night for a month. but two, so that we could sort of build buzz around it as an event, ending with a live Zoom room where everyone could just hang out, which was great because it was just like, oh, this is like hanging out in the bar after the show. This is awesome. And of course, the people who chose to hang out are often like the people who would hang out at the bar after the show. So the next thing that we're doing, this show, Theater, A Love Story, is trying to explore the intersection of like theater and film. And the play itself is kind of a deconstruction of like, what are we even doing in theaters anyway? And we thought, well, this is a great show to like do at sort of the close, hopefully, of our pandemic season, and use it to interrogate what is theater really about, and then also using theatricality and film techniques to sort of blur the lines of what is this? Is this a play or film? And so we're going to be live streaming some elements of that and then intercutting that with pre-recorded elements in a way that I think is going to be pretty exciting.
So Jeff and Nathan, how have your audiences responded to the online content that your organizations have been working on?
Well, I mean, with Lab, we, our process is about workshopping plays and helping playwrights develop. We take a first draft and help them develop into something, that's almost a finished product, right? And so that last step where we use Liz Lerman critical response process to do audience feedback is basically impossible now, right? So we've been trying to do sort of kind of similar to what Eileen was talking about, except not as live, that they're available to, kind of chat during the show, right? They can ask questions during the show. But even that yes, we've had some good conversations, I think, after the show, but there's just not that element of spontaneity with the audience, right? Like we're always facilitating the conversation, but now it's like facilitator heavy, we've got to decide exactly what's going to happen next every step, rather than letting that sort of organic process conversation happen with the audience. So I think we're working through that, though. I know, Tori, I know you can speak to that as well, but I think we're still getting a lot of valuable feedback from playwrights, and the playwrights are still finding the process valuable, and that's what's most important to us as a company anyway. So we also all of a sudden we're competitors with Netflix and Hulu and
That's exactly right.
other online platforms. I mean, that's something you never dreamed we would have to think about, right? So I just think,
yeah.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. So St. X did fine. We always sell between 2,000 to 3,000 in-person tickets, and then we had this COVID thing happen, and we actually had to limit the number of people in our theater to 75 people. And so then we, had to turn it into an online thing, and we streamed it, and we ended up, like Andrew was saying, we got more people the first time, right? So it was sent out to all sorts of people and all sorts of alumni. Anybody who ever went to that school, all 10 to 15,000 of them got like an email, and they were like, oh, the novelty of it, I think, drew them in, which is great. But I'm not sure that's the right question to be asking, because I directed the show. I question the experience they had with it in their living rooms. How quality was it? Because so for my specific example, War of the Worlds, it's a slow burn on purpose. It tries to create a phony reality that and it spends a long time sort of grounding the audience into a phony reality so that it can break that reality, halfway through the show with an alien invasion. And that only works if you're fully invested in the phony reality. And that only works if you're a trapped audience member, where you have to invest in this phony reality. I definitely could see someone saying, oh, look at this. The high school I went to has put up a show. Let's check it out. And then 5 minutes in going, what the hell is this? And then just turning it off. And so, yeah, we got your money, but it's not meant to be seen in a living room, like Jeff was saying. I don't want to compete with the Queen's Gambit, because I'm directing something that was not written to compete with the Queen's Gambit in that way, which is another reason that, like, for my next professional project, if I can't do live theater, I'm going to do this thing that's like episodic and meant to be listened to. And it's meant to be in the format it's in.
I mean, this is the thing. I think live theater, to be most effective, needs to be an experience, not just a show that I could see on whatever. And so that's inherent in sort of the play selection that we do as well, like what is inherently theatrical and would be less successful on a screen. So now the conversation is like, okay, how do we make what's on a screen inherently theatrical when you're looking at it through this box, and how do we tailor it for the medium?
What I really liked about what you're saying about like having to switch your structure from choosing what is inherently theatrical to like what is an okay script to do on film as a theatrical piece. Because I feel like, again, it's the same thing, just done again with a live script, because I just love the live. And thinking about essentially like, okay, how do I take the structure of this and do it in an actual socially distant fashion, right? Like, not using my stage, stepping out of the idea of the people sit and we look at the thing, right, in the frame, and deciding like, is there a way to like take the actual script that people know? And honestly, we did a production of Godspell that worked out super well. It was outdoors, of course, distance staging, everyone in a fabulous like hippie bit of masking, but it worked because we broke it down across a 300-acre park, right? And you had to walk through it essentially, right? And that went over super well, certainly. And I was on a webinar I admit at the beginning of this. It was like, he who figures out how to do like the book musical Little for a couple of years is sort of king in musical theater. And of course, I'm a big musical theater nerd. So I took that to heart and was like, okay, let's think about how we actually flip the script, literally in terms of how we can reconfigure this, right? And do it in a socially distant format. And so it's not all that different from trying to change to an idea of like, how do I break this down for a, visual, digital, format instead, but doing it right in 3D space, right? Same essential skills, I assume, just like in a slightly different application, right?
There is also that like theater is at least to me, and I assume to everybody else who's on the Zoom call, is inherently exciting and wonderful to us because we're the theater kids. But digital is this monster that's like a consumer eater, and it's like, great, give me more content. What is it? So like, I joined TikTok, and it's just this gobble monster of like, okay, this is the thing that everybody's doing. Oh, now this is the thing that everybody is doing. And so figuring out like how to chase that dragon in like, well, what will bring the people to see your content? And some things that we have just been exploring is like, pulling back the curtain and showing them behind the scenes and showing them what it takes to do, what we're doing, because we've never done it before. So it's like, oh, great. And having those moments of like, great, you're going to have this opportunity to have a talk back with the audience. Like Jeff says, you get to speak with them in real time in this digital format. And you get, I don't pretend to be these A-list celebrities of Cincinnati, Ohio, but that is exciting for people. They're like, oh, I just watched this piece that you did, and now you're here, and I can actually have a moment with you. And you don't do that in Netflix, and they don't have that in movies. And so it's like, that is that sparkle.
Mm-hmm. So Godspell's lucky in that there's a whole other set of licensing to the original New York staging, right? That's owned by Circus Maximus, shout out Nan Perlman. She's amazing. But yeah, like she was I had to work with her about it. And I had to explain, we wouldn't do this except there's a pandemic on, right? But so we do need to be able to essentially like let people experience it broken down, right? As opposed to in one foul swoop. So, and that meant, repeating scenes, right? And that's why I was like, we're gonna have to like sing this song a couple times to get everybody through in their like smaller groups, right? But we put a cap on it just like a regular house has a cap, right? And that was, as long as we stuck to that, it was essentially like, okay, if you do it in these 5 groups, we can do it, But yes, it took a lot of back and forth and a lot of trying to get people to call you back in a pandemic, which I'll be honest with you, that's one of my number one things in the pandemic is I understand the brain fog, I super do, but boy, it's hurting cats out here, man. Like so hard. I absolutely feel for people, but getting anybody to call you back is like a whole extra layer of waiting and hoping these days. And I'm hoping that there are actually some other shows we can do in this format where I don't have to do quite as much canoodling, right? Because it's a little, more true to form while still giving people an outdoor kind of different experience. And so trying to think a little more about that kind of style where it's a little more picnicky, it's a little more like BY, not necessarily B, but, bring your own whatever snacks and nonsense and come out with the kids. That was actually the neatest thing about Godspell. I have 2 nephews. They're not that into theater, they're sporty. I don't understand. I want to, but boy, I don't get it. But they have to come to the shows sometimes. And so I was like, okay, Aunt Maggie, we saw your thing, right? They loved this. Why? Because they only had to sit still for like 10 minutes at a time. And then it moved to the next scene. And it was like a totally different experience because your kids could work out their energy walking in the park, right? As they moved to the next space to watch the next part of the show, right? And then on top of that, we actually had a really interesting situation where it also led to just a lot more conversation, right? Like instead of like waiting till you get in the car, right? And like, okay, what did you think about that show, right? People were like discussing the themes and things just like in between, right? Like there's like a commercial break basically to stop and go like, hey, that thing that we loved in that scene, or that was so funny, or it's Godspell. So obviously there was a fair amount of, people chatting about their interpretation of biblical passages and what have you. But it just made for like a totally different experience where you processed in the moment, like as it was happening, as opposed to like, we saw a thing. How did you feel about it? Right. So that was sort of cool too. It certainly felt like more of a community.
My next question is, how has all of this affected you personally as an artist? We've touched on it a little bit, but do you feel like you've grown as an artist? Maybe you've lost some things? What's going on personally because of all this? I'd like to hear what y'all think.
I'll be like the silver lining, I guess. I don't know. Like, I feel like I took a sort of break in my like sort of artistic journey. I went back to grad school, and I don't know if people have been to grad school, it kind of kills your spirit for like just a little while. But like, so like I had taken like a sort of like, I'm just gonna work this job for a while, and when the pandemic happened, it realized, oh shit, you mean I could never do theater? Like, it feels like I could never do theater again, right? Like, and all of a sudden I had this like new invigorated commitment to make sure that doesn't happen, right? That I don't lose that sort of artistic side of myself and keep pursuing those artistic goals that I've wanted my whole life. And so I feel like it kind of gave me a little kick in the butt to be like, hey, you don't realize what you're losing until it's gone, I guess, sort of thing. And so I was able to finish my thesis during the beginning of the pandemic, get my stuff out of the way, and all of a sudden I directed a few shows. I was acting in some shows. I mean, they were Zoom shows, but they were still shows. I was back kind of in my groove a little bit. And then I was sort of toward the end of the pandemic. It's like, I just want to go back to the theater, right? I want to go to a cast party, and I want to like, and you're just really starting to miss all those things and that sort of sense of community that we, yes, as Eileen said, we still have, and there's still like new outlets for it, but there's just not that same sort of experience. So now it's like, I guess I'm in the COVID fatigue, I guess, or whatever, the quarantine fatigue, because now I'm like, but I want to do art now. Like I remembered that I liked art. Like now I wanted to go do it again. And so I'm kind of, I have a silver lining with like, but it's like starting to rust a little bit. Let's go with that.
I agree with you, Jeff. My silver lining was I learned that I love live audiences. When you do this, as long as we have, you almost begin to take the whole thing for granted, like you were saying, or even get tired of it and complain. Like you're like, I can't believe I have to.
I got rehearsal again.
I have to drive 15 minutes to give a 15-minute curtain, like whatever it is that you're saying. But so after for War of the Worlds, we had live showings of it, and we have a 500-seat theater, and there were 75 people in it, which means it feels like no one was there. And I would step out on stage to welcome everybody, and I would just feel the emptiness and the loss. And I didn't, like you were saying, didn't realize what I had till it was gone. I was like, where are all the people? I want to talk for 15 minutes and connect with you. Like, where are you?
I used to hate like meet and greets after the show. Now I'm like, oh, I just want to meet and greet everyone. Where's everyone at? I can totally get it.
Yes. I'm positioning myself by the door on the way out just to say goodbye to everybody. And I never used to do that.
Yeah, it's been an interesting thing because because of just how rapidly we've had to pivot, I haven't really stopped or had any downtime. So I am hoping to like take some days off at some point in my life. But where was I going with that? I don't know. That's just a dream. now that that's out there. Oh, right. One of the weird things is so like every season for the last 13 years, I've designed at least one show at Shakespeare Theater of New Jersey. And I was supposed to design the December show there this year. And it was a production of A Midwinter's Night Dream that the artistic director was going to direct as sort of the culmination of, I think, her 30th anniversary season. One of those like big numbers. And then that didn't happen. And it's like, I've gone to Madison, New Jersey at least once a year, every year for the last 13 years. And that's so weird to not do that thing and see those people. And these are all friends, but we're friends that, see each other once a year because we get to make a play together. And so it's so weird to not do that. And it's also just sort of weird for me as a human person that who is normally splits my time between Los Angeles and Cincinnati. And now it's going to be like a full year that I've not been in Cincinnati, at least, before I get to go back. I hope I didn't leave the sink running.
You didn't.
I did it, I'm sure. But it's so like that's just sort of a weird point of disconnect for me too. And like this is the longest I've been away from Cincinnati since I went to grad school in 2003.
This is the most I have ever spent in Cincinnati. And it is also weird. It is strange to be in one place. I think that part of the reason I love being an actor is because every few months I am doing something new. And definitely in the pandemic, it's new things, but all in the same place, which is a weird, like, okay, let's innovate. What is here? And I think personally for me as an artist, it has given me an incredible amount of agency. When I started doing online things, a lot of other people weren't yet. And so people were coming to me and they were like, how did you figure this out? I was like, I YouTubed for like 3 days to figure out where the power button was. That's how I did it. But I'm like how many times do we go into a situation with that anxiety of like, am I enough? Am I good enough? Do I belong at this table? And I'm coming out of that going, yeah, there's room at the table. Like, if we wait for the right conditions, they will never come. But if we start, the conditions become right. And I think if there's one thing that the pandemic has proven is that theater people, especially anyone who has taken a stage management class, is like, get it done. We will figure it out. Start the train and let's go.
Yeah, I completely agree. Everything that you just said, right? Like taking agency for the work, right? Stepping away from like the season grind, right? Like this is what we do every August. This is what we do every November. And just like opening oneself up to an entire world of possible art making choices, right? And for once getting time to just be like, oh, what do you have? Oh, let's work on that thing you're working at, right? Like I didn't have to be like, well, I'm sorry, I'm sending all this money to New York to buy these rights, and you can't have the stage because I need to build this set that we're gonna throw away in 3 weeks. No worries, everyone. Right? Like I can just be like, nope, would you like the stage? Who wants my stage? Who wants to play on the stage? You have to do it by yourself. And I'll be the only person in the back running the board, but it's still like it's open, it's free. I can actually utilize it for the people I love and care about in terms of art, right? Like I don't have to spend all that time and money only on like, this is what the theater season is, right? And really tried to pledge to myself that like I would not worry about playing in anyone else's sandboxes ever again. I would just like make enough money to make sure we stay solvent. That's important. Keep the lights on. But otherwise, like, whatever. Like, I'm lucky to have a job, right? Like, I try to get up every day and just be like, shit, I still have a gig. Oh my God. Like, what incredible luck of the universe. I'm so glad, and I should just like do everything I can to be worthy of, having had it this whole time, right?
Do you think your organizations will continue with some sort of non-traditional programming post-pandemic, once we can all get back into the theater and do live performances with butts in the seats and bars after the show and all of the fun bits that we all miss so much? Do you think you will continue some of your remote content that you have developed over this past year post-pandemic?
So one of the groups, Comedy Sports Cincinnati, we pivoted very, very quickly and immediately went to online. Improv is really great in that way that we're just like, yeah, let's see if it works. Crash and burn, cool. We don't make any money anyway. So everyone in comedy sports worldwide really did just go whole hog, like, and it's, StreamYard, YouTube, Vimeo, Zoom, all of the platforms are kind of utilized with different comedy sports. And they have managed to create this entire comedy sports network where they're not just doing their improv shows online, but they're bringing other improv content there, and improv festivals and comedians and sketches. And so they are expanding that world. And in that world, not only Chicago theater goers are watching, but people in Utah and people in New Zealand. And I don't think anyone really thought about that when we first got all of this started. But I'm like, oh my God, there are people who've literally never seen me perform in my own family who were like, I saw your show last night. I'm like, I didn't hear you. You didn't chat, but now you're telling me, and that warms my heart. So yes, there is a space for this, and maybe it is like, maybe it's shows, maybe it's after parties, maybe it's readings, but I don't see it going away, and I hope it doesn't, because it's a marvelous way to connect with theaters that otherwise I wouldn't be able to.
I think for us, we've got a couple things that we're going to keep pursuing. We've got our Radio No audio play program that I think we're going to just keep doing that, because it's a great way for us to be able to produce more scripts and get more actors and writers work out there. And so that's an exciting thing that we can just keep doing. I think for the Fringe, maintaining a digital component every year that allows international groups to participate in one way or another is potentially really great. And then I think for a thing that we would love to do when rights are available is to have the option of at a distance tickets for our main stage show in addition to in person. And it's not just a thing that expands audience, but to me, it's an accessibility issue. Because if there are people anyway who are immunocompromised and shouldn't be around people, or people in the deaf community, because it's difficult for us to provide ASL just within the constraints of our space, but we can provide captions for a pre-recorded theater at a distance video. I think all of that is going to be really valuable, as well as maybe other digital experiments. And then just from a practical, the way things work point of view, I think the ability to do some rehearsals over Zoom is potentially amazing. And like, and if we can finally get, for example, some of the theatrical unions, particularly Equity, on board with the ability to stream rehearsals, that could be huge for freelance designers. A few years ago, I got flown to New York to see a run through of a show, and I was in New York for 14 hours, like to see one rehearsal. And like, how ridiculous. You know, it was great. It was great. I was glad I saw it, but also like if we could have just hopped on Zoom and I could have seen it, like all the resources that would have saved.
Was
I
the
wouldn't have
jet
had
fuel
to,
worth it, right?
yeah. There are things that we can adjust work-wise that I think will help in the future. And then also on some of our shows, like I was lighting design, I did the lighting design on shows from 1,800 miles away, actually controlling the lighting console in our space on my iPad. And that's also amazing, because then if I can start programming when not on site and, you know, then get there, it just has the potential for revolution, particularly with the larger national conversation about eliminating 10 of 12s from our work environment, and focusing on more human-centric theater making practices. I think, you know, if we as an industry take this time to reassess what we've been doing just because that's what we were taught, and build new systems of working, I think it has the potential to do great things.
Yeah. I'm hoping to do production meetings online. We've been doing that, and it's been better. Everyone has a little glass of wine. They seem to be enjoying themselves. And when you have something to share, image or design wise, everyone can see it. You just share your screen and everyone sees it, and you don't have to wait 15 minutes for that to get passed around the room. There are some things that work a little better.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate. We've been doing our lab meetings online, and you know, we're able to have conversations, I think, that we may not have had, which is weird. I don't know why, but I think ideas seem to be like more segmented. There's less like sort of convolution while you're speaking. But as far as like the theater making, I think we all have to remember as theater makers that this is not going to be like it was when it went into quarantine, right? It's not going to be a snap. It's going to have to be a blend. So you're going to, because even if we open for live performances, we're still going to have limited capacity. We're going to have certain people who can't come out. There's certain people who can't get a vaccine, blah, you know, the list goes on and on and on. So we've got to find a way for our digital platforms to blend into it. And I think a bunch of you are talking about really awesome ideas that you're already doing that do that. But the idea that we're just going to switch back to and lose all the stuff that we created during this time, I think would be not only foolhardy, but also counterproductive, right? So for us at Lab, the amount of submissions that we got based on our sort of digital platforms this year from all over the freaking world compared to when we were more of a local live, you know, theater company it's just crazy. How many plays did we get to read for submissions, Tori? Like in February, like 40.
So in February we had it was.
So,
I mean, I want to say it was over 200 submissions that we got for our summer 2020 festival. That we all, you know, that we had to sift through and read. And for this upcoming festival, we've got the same trend is going. Submissions are open until the end of March, and we're already over 100 submissions. So, you know, we're attracting people from all over the world as opposed to the tri-state area, which is kind of where we were previously, and now we're getting stuff from everywhere. So I think in that respect, having some sort of digital presence for us at Lab is definitely going to be necessary, even if it's just we do a live performance, but most of our rehearsals are on Zoom so that our playwright in Europe can join us. You know, I mean, that's the type of thing that we're looking at now.
I think
Yeah.
that's another silver lining coming out of all of this, right? Is like, you can reasonably presume people will know how to use this technology, right? In a way that is far more ubiquitous than before we went through this experience, right? And so now I don't have any fear of sending out that link and expecting people to know how to use it, and understanding that they need to have a certain amount of like bandwidth and Wi-Fi going on, right? Like, and you couldn't do that before, right? Like, not reliably so, right? Especially outside of business world, right? You know, poor actors, I don't expect them all to have amazing broadband at home, but like, this has sort of forced that a little bit, right? So a lot of people, I mean, I upgraded my internet, we had to, right? Like, no other option. So that's been like super helpful to all of this, I think, right?
And I think
Sorry.
it's also people value like time. Like,
Yeah.
oh, how great is it that, hey, right after dinner, I've got to hop on a Zoom rehearsal.
Exactly. Yeah.
But when rehearsal's done, I'm at home.
I completely 100% agree with that. Like, not dragging my physical carapace 10 freaking places across the day has been like the revolution of this, right? Like, I get a lot more work done with a lot more like actual time spent, because I can all just, you know, it's all here from this weird corner of my dining room, right? But it's a lot more, you know, it just goes a lot more quickly, and I'm a lot less exhausted at the end of the day from having done all of that physical running in the real world, right? But I also think the reasons to keep it are exactly what you're saying about also like, think about the theaters giving back that time, right? Every hour you are not physically working on the show, like, I'm not misusing your time, is more money you're making technically, right? Like, it is less of your time, your wage goes up as you put less actual physical time. Think about, and that's what makes people mad, right? When we're all in rehearsal and we're at that 10 out of 12 and you're like, I'm not even being used and I have been here this whole time, right? So it gives us a lot more options. I'll never go back to a regular rehearsal schedule again. We'll never come in to in-person for 4 full weeks to like get a show up. Because I know now that there are so many things we can do at home. I can give a lot of that time back to those people. And when you only have so much money to pay people, every minute counts, right? So yeah, now some of it's going to be about who's good at learning their stuff at home and coming in with it like ready to fly, right? That's going to have to be, you know, a harder dividing line. I think now there'll be less chances to get it in the room. But, you know, for a while, that's, you know, the safest option. And again, I think it is trying to be more thoughtful of people's real lives around our theater practices. And exactly what he was saying before, which is don't just do what we grew up with, because it was, you know, well, they kicked my ass, so I'm going to kick yours. It's like, well, maybe we could just be nicer to other people's asses and, you know.
Do you think I mean, this is just a question that came up where you were talking, Maggie. Do you think we lose something in the sense of sort of like communal creative space if we,
Yes.
you know, because like that sort of like table read and like that sort of like sense of community that we have with our cast members, I think that's where a lot of creativity comes from. What do you think the balance is like between like losing that? Yeah, I can cook dinner now while I'm off stage, but you know, what did I lose by not being here to support my castmates and stuff like that?
Right. No, I think you're 100% right about that. I do think there's something lost. Certainly our production of Godspell, so we rehearsed that online for 3 weeks, essentially. Music rehearsals online. What a stupid thing. I'll never do that again. But, you know, I had to make sure that they had the music plunked out somewhere. So fine. So we were on the ground 4 days for that show. We only ever saw each other for 4 days, 2 days of rehearsal, 2 days of shows, and that was it. But I do think, yes, there is something that is lost, and we'll have to be thoughtful about, you know, how do we utilize these Zoom rehearsals where they're most useful, and get the work done that we know needs to get done, but maybe is a little more either tedious or individual or whatever it might be. But really thinking hard about how we're building the communal experience alongside the directing experience in a more intentional way, so we can still utilize these tools, but do it in such a way as to not lose that relationship. But yes, I think that's a big issue that we're going to have to be intentional about.
That's what I wondered, because I feel like that's another thing that we'll have to blend, right? We'll have to blend this sort of, okay, well, now we have all these resources and we were forced to use them. Let's use them for the things we need them for, but we got to remember some of the old stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
what's the best application of
right,
this? Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's true of any time we incorporate technology into theater. It's like some even just shows have a tendency of like, we're doing this because we can, instead of like, is that the thing that's actually most appropriate for this production or in this environment, you know? So I think, yeah, it is, our toolbox has expanded, but that doesn't remove the artistic burden of selecting your tools carefully.
Yeah.
And being prepared to use the tools, I think, is also like, because even in person, like Maggie was talking about with wasted time, like, oh, hey, I've been here for like 8 hours, and you know, it was because that was the option. Like, we all have to show up because that's what we do, and great. So now front loading with that planning and like,
Right.
how do we intentionally use each of these tools, I think is now going to be that.
And how can they complement each other? I
Yeah.
think it's the next problem. we'll have to solve.
Absolutely. But the days of calling everyone and just waiting to be used, I think that shit's over, right? And needs to be.
Great to blend it in that way of like, okay, great, I need these 4 people in person, but these 8 people can be over here on Zoom doing their thing.
Yeah.
Like, and oh, I don't have that space in my building. You don't have to have that space in your building.
Exactly.
I was shocked at the level of how the quality didn't drop from performance on performance day. What I noticed dropped was a sense of community among cast members and class members. So I'm teaching college students acting classes online.
Fun.
And you know what? It's not as bad as I thought. Here's what's different about it. Their performances are just as good. In fact, there are a lot of advantages where, like, all of a sudden they have props. You spend all your time being like, get some props, you know, like you're eating a sandwich in this scene, bring a sandwich. But now they're at home, they have sandwiches galore. Like, it's great.
Don't need a sandwich in this scene. I want
Like, stop eating so many sandwiches. It's not in every scene. So like there are actually advantages. And what I felt like was the quality that I got out of the students in terms of acting was the same. And the course evaluations shockingly were the same, where they were like, oh, I learned a lot about acting. But what I noticed was different, because I taught acting before the pandemic, was that none of them were friends at the end of it.
Oh, yeah.
That sense of community that we all came together and we risked and shared in front of one another, that was gone. And so we're going to have to ask ourselves as theater makers, how important is that? And like Eileen was saying, what rehearsals do we call in person with the idea of forming that? Like, how do we intentionally design that in? Because it won't be there unless we do.
Oh, all right. This has been a fantastic evening, my friends. Thank you so much. Thank you to Nathan and Andrew and Eileen and Maggie and Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and hopefully we'll see you all back in the theater again real soon. Bye, everyone.